So again, welcome. This is the Grassroots training for the evening. We're going to be looking tonight at some additional challenges, particularly in the women's game this time. So for those of us who referee women's soccer, this will be helpful for us to start to see a little bit of the differences between the women's game and the men's game, and also some similarities. So we're going to talk about challenges. I want to remind everybody and some people who might be new what our 4 primary considerations need to be for challenges. I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. The first is our mode of contact. The second is our point of contact. Mode of contact is what on the body you are using to make contact with an opponent. Where on their body you make contact is the point of contact. So as I like to say, if I punch you in the face, the mode of contact would be my fist. The point of contact would be your face. That's the quickest and easiest way to remember what mode and point of contact are. Now, we use those considerations because they're the 2 most important decisions that we have, or the 2 most important points of information that we have when making a decision about misconduct. We think about mode of contact, what surfaces are harder than others. So again, if it's a tackle like we'll see tonight, is it the bottom of the studs or is it the side of the foot? The mode of contact is important because if you're using the bottom of your foot or your studs, that might do some damage to the opponent, more so than maybe the top of your foot or the side of your foot if you make contact with that mode of contact. So what you're using, a hard surface versus a soft surface, can determine how reckless or how much safety has been endangered when you're making a challenge. Point of contact, we think about the same things. Where on the body? Is it a hard surface or is it a soft surface? Is it a part of the body that is susceptible to injury? So if you make contact with the top of somebody's foot, that's going to be a little bit less dangerous than if you make that same contact to their Achilles or to their ankle or to their knee, areas that do have more susceptibility to injury. So thinking about those surfaces on the body that are more dangerous than others are why we think about the point of contact. Next one is the shape of the body, and we can glean a lot of information from the shape of the body. So the first one we're typically going to look at is, are they making a challenge with a straight leg? If that leg is straight, it means there's going to be a lot more force through that challenge because their leg is not bending at all to absorb however much contact they're using. So if they make that contact with a straight leg versus a bent leg, that's going to be a lot more damaging and something we want to think about when we're thinking about our misconduct. The same goes for, is their body completely off the ground or are they sliding on the ground? Because again, we're contemplating force here. And so if their body is on the ground, it means the ground is absorbing through gravity a lot of their speed of the challenge, which means the damage to the opponent probably will be less. Versus if they are flying through the air, it means they first had to use enough force to fly through the air, but B, they also don't have anything slowing them down. And so that means when they do make contact with the opponent, they'll be going that much faster, which means that much more force. So we want to narrow down a lot of these things to just generally speaking, what is the shape of the body when they are making that contact. And then the last thing is the ability to play the ball. Have they made a legitimate attempt to play the ball, or did they make a challenge knowing that there really was no way to play the ball? A couple things, one, if there's a stomp on somebody's leg while the ball's gone, then clearly there was no ability to play the ball there. We might escalate our misconduct. If they go through the back of somebody when there was no way to get to the ball without going through the back of the opponent, that's going to escalate our concern. And then, for example, if the player's got the ball on their right foot and the defender puts a challenge in on their planted left foot, no real ability to play the ball. So just some things to think about because we can start to glean how much damage could have been done by the ability to play the ball. So I'm going to leave this up here for a moment. I know that this was a very brief summary, but I want to leave this up here so you can take a screenshot. Because as we go through the rest of the clips we're going to look at this evening, I'm going to keep coming back and asking you to reference these 4 considerations primarily. So I'm going to leave that up there for a second and let you screenshot it. Any questions on those considerations before we move on? All right, so we'll go ahead and jump right into our clips then. I'm going to get us out of our PowerPoint and move over to our clips. So here's our first one. I'll play the clip a couple of times, and then I will launch the poll. Play that through one more time. And then one last time, and I'll give you a pause at the moment of truth. Just a little bit late there. So there's our moment of truth. All right. So I'm going to put the poll up, and let's see what you think. A few more seconds to get your votes in. All right, and I'll share our results. So we had a handful of people here who thought that this was no foul. Play on. I'll talk about that here in a second. 59% say this is just a careless foul, no misconduct is needed, and 38% say we have a yellow card for a reckless challenge. Nobody, thank goodness, has a red card for this challenge. So I'm going to start with why this is a foul, because we had some people say, a handful of people say this is no foul. So this is a foul, even though the player does technically actually just barely nick the ball. And so there's a topic we always like to get out of the way as early as possible, which is getting the ball first is not an excuse for making unfair contact with an opponent. So if you look closely here, you can see she barely nicks the ball right there, but then makes the bulk of the contact with the opponent's foot. So the reason this is still a foul, even though, yes, she has made contact with the ball, is because she makes additional contact in a secondary motion with the opponent. So yes, she nicks the ball here, but the ball is going to go off in this direction. And we have to ask ourselves, if this player in blue doesn't make the extra contact with the player in yellow's foot, what would likely happen? And that would be the yellow player would run over here, get the ball, and off we'd go back. Because the ball went over right there. If yellow player doesn't get tripped by blue player, she's just on the ball here and keeps going with possession. But because the blue player follows through and makes unfair contact with her after nicking the ball, we have a foul. So don't let the idea that the ball has been played first negate the foul. If a challenge is made on the ball is won fairly, and the ball is won first, and the defender then initiates additional contact with the opponent, we would consider that to be unfair contact. If the attacking player, by means of running or jumping or whatever, initiates contact after the ball gets played, we would consider that to be fair contact, because the defender just played the ball and then the attacker initiated that contact. If you can visualize, we see this a lot on hook sliding challenges, where a player will slide when the ball and the forward momentum of the attacker who had the ball causes them to stumble over the attacker's legs and fall to ground. Well, the defender didn't initiate that contact. They played the ball. The attacker kept running forward and tripped over the legs that were there after they played the ball. That nature of contact is the attacker making contact with the defender. Thus, there's nothing wrong with it. The defender initiating contact with the attacker after playing the ball would then be considered a foul. So that's what happens in this one. It's a little bit of a detailed explanation, but it's good to get that concept in. So now we have to talk about why we have a discrepancy here between either a careless foul or a yellow card. And to do that, we want to talk about the considerations that we looked at a few minutes ago, starting with our mode of contact and our point of contact. So if we look at this, we have top of foot to top of foot. That is our mode and our point of contact. Blue player touches the ball away and makes contact with the opponent with the top of her foot, and that contact is made to the Swedish player here on the top of her foot. Both top of feet are considered safer spaces to make contact with an opponent. It's not the studs. It's not as hard a surface, so it's not going to do as much damage. The top of the foot won't do as much damage to an opponent as the studs if you're using them. Sheer nature of the hardness of the surface, but also the motion of the body to make that kind of contact. She's just stuck her leg out here. She's not swung it through. She's not kicked her. She's not driven the leg into her. And so because it's the top of the foot to the top of the foot, that's going to lower our expectation for potential misconduct. Next, we talk about the shape of the body. The leg is bent here, which means it's not straight. It's not a lunging motion. Her left foot is planted on the ground. Her right foot is just stuck out to the side, which means there wasn't a lot of force in this challenge. Remember, shape of the body is going to help us determine how much force is used. Because she's leaning in one direction and just sticking her leg out, there's very little force being used in the opponent. And then the last consideration is ability to play the ball. Clearly, she's barely touched the ball here, so there was an ability to play the ball. In fact, she has played the ball. There's just some subsequent contact that we have to be concerned about. So really, we know our answer from the first two considerations, which is point and mode of contact, each to the top of the foot. That's going to mean we just have a careless foul here. So the answer here is no yellow card needed. This is just a careless foul because it's top of foot to top of foot, very little force being used with an attempt or with the ability to play the ball. Any questions on that analysis? We had a comment here, there's contact on the foot and on the leg with the knee. Yeah, that's if that happens, which it doesn't, it's hard to tell from this angle if it actually does or not. You can see from the follow through that really the contact that is of consequence is the foot. The foot goes back after the contact happens. I actually don't think there's any knee to leg contact there. It's hard to see that, but even if there was, this is still just a reckless challenge. So you can see here, contact happens with the foot. There's almost no contact, if at all, with the thigh or anything like that. So definitely just top of foot to top of foot here. And this would be considered a careless foul. Any other questions on that analysis? Just a tip for everybody, if you're going to type in questions, please select all panelists and attendees so that everybody has the ability to see it. And yes, I'm sorry, I did not mean to say reckless. You are correct. It's just a careless challenge. I apologize. Question here, did the attacking player fake the injury here? We have no way of knowing that. We want to get away from questioning intent and just look at what we actually saw. And so in this situation, we have no idea to know if the attacking player is faking an injury here or not. It doesn't matter. We don't take the reaction from the player into consideration. If we go and look at the leg and they have cleat marks down their leg, then maybe we can glean that information, but that's not going to be a faking or an intent-based thing. That's just looking at evidence. Another question here, how do you judge force? A lot of that is what we talked about earlier with the shape of the body. Speed and intensity is something we look at. So if a player runs 30 yards at a dead sprint and jumps as hard as they can into a tackle, then that's going to tell us there's a lot of force. But the shape of their body is going to help us to understand that. And so we look at the speed, we look at the distance a player has run to come and make the contact, and we look at, of course, the nature of the contact as well. Another question here, shouldn't earlier in the game challenges be considered in terms of a yellow card? The answer to that is actually no. We don't want to consider a foul differently at different points of the game. So I know that there's been an idea out there for a while that we want to over punish or overreact fouls early in the game to set a tone. I would counsel you against that because it ends up making you very inconsistent as a referee throughout the game, and that can be a problem. So early in the game, a foul is a foul is a foul. You call the foul. If the foul meets the threshold of a yellow card, no matter what time it is during the game, you give the yellow card. The only thing that can factor into duration of the game is what the general temperature of the game is, but that's a little bit more nuanced. And also if we're dealing with persistent offenses, meaning if the same player has committed 2 or 3 fouls, or if that player who's been fouled has been fouled 2 or 3 or 4 times during the game, now we have to start worrying about it. But we're no longer judging that challenge by itself. We're judging persistent offenses. And that's a completely separate part of the law, a completely separate consideration. What we're talking about tonight is how to judge misconduct for individual challenges without taking into consideration what this player might have been doing for the previous 70 minutes. Because again, we don't have the whole game to look at. We just have this clip. Now, if this is this player's 4th foul in the game, maybe we're going to give a yellow card. But the yellow card's not going to be for that foul. The yellow card is going to be for persistent offenses, which is very different than a reckless challenge. We had another question here. What about the defender charging the attacker, making hard contact unavoidable? I don't think this was hard contact, so clearly it was avoidable. In fact, you can see she runs toward the attacker here, but goes in front of her and just sticks her foot out. So this is not a charging foul. It's a simple trip, and one would argue it's a trip because the player in yellow starts to turn and go the other direction. So I don't think this is running at a player. I think this is going in to make a challenge, which is perfectly normal and perfectly acceptable. Any other questions on this analysis? Question here, would the referee decision be different if it were not in the middle of the field, i.e. if the same foul was close to the penalty area? The answer to that is no. If this is a foul, it's a foul. This is clearly a tripping foul. We would have to call this no matter where it happened. The only difference being is inside the penalty area. If somebody gets the ball, we usually need a lot more contact with the opponent to be willing to call a foul. So I don't know that we would want to call this as a penalty kick because the player has won the ball. And I don't know that a penalty kick would be an appropriate reaction for a player who's gotten the ball. But otherwise, anywhere else on the field, we want to consider this a foul. Any other questions? Some good questions to start us off. Thank you. All right, then I'll move on to the next clip. All right, watch it a couple more times. It's a shorter clip. One more time. All right, there's our moment of truth. And I'll go ahead and launch the poll. Let's see what you got. A few more seconds to get your answers in. All right. Oops, almost did that. Okay. So here's the results. We had 2 people say no foul, play on. We had 31% say careless foul, no misconduct needed. 65% on a yellow card. And then we had 3% say this is a red card for serious foul play. So looking at this freeze frame right now, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. We're going to talk about point of contact and mode of contact first, because those are the two considerations that we have. So if we look at mode and point of contact, let's just start with mode of contact. This is an unusual one in that the player, the yellow player here, has actually not made any contact with her opponent with her feet. Left foot's on the ground, right foot's on the ground. So this is a tripping foul, perhaps, where the feet haven't really made any contact. In fact, the only contact here appears to be the left thigh of this defender here. The mode of contact being the left thigh, perhaps. The point of contact, also the left thigh. Looks like she makes contact thigh to thigh here. If we talk about shape of body, this is a player who's just standing straight up. As you can see from this angle, she has gone in to put her foot in, realizes she's going to miss the ball, and backs her body out to try to avoid making contact. You can see here she's pulling her leg up and pulling her body back to try not to make any contact. So it's important that we be able to see that from the player here. That's a player who's trying to pull her body out of the way. There's a player right there trying to pull her body out of the way. And this right here is the interesting freeze frame for me, because as you can see, there's actually very little contact that happens between these two players. It's starting to happen right now, and yet this player's already screaming like she got shot from a cannon at the top of the stadium. And so understanding the timing of the contact and the reaction from the players is crucial to understanding the nature of what kind of contact we're talking about here. So it's interesting to me on this clip that this yellow player really hasn't made that much contact with the opponent. And the other thing we want to look at here is look where this player's leg started. And then she leaves it out there as she runs to make contact. So the short answer here is our mode of contact and our point of contact are minimal thigh-to-thigh contact. The shape of the body is not anything reckless in nature, and the ability to play the ball is there. Which means the answer to this one is actually this is just simply a careless foul. And interestingly, when I use this clip to discuss with professional level referees, there's actually an interesting discussion about whether or not this is simulation from the player in red. So we actually have a lot of people at the professional level try to suggest that this is not a foul at all, and in fact, a simulation from the attacking player. I would not suggest that is the right way to look at this clip, because this player the player in yellow here has gotten in the way of the opponent and kept her from running the way that she wanted to run, which by itself can be a foul because the law says tripping or attempt to trip. But at the end of the day, there's not much contact there. This player sells it really, really well, which just emphasizes for us the importance of really focusing on the mode of contact and the point of contact when making these decisions. This player's body language suggests she's trying to get out of the way of any contact after mistiming a play for the ball, and there's very minimal contact here. So we would be looking here for a simple foul, yellow card, or excuse me, no yellow card for a careless foul. We had a question here. This is hard to see in real time. Yes, it is. Absolutely. This is not an easy decision to make, but this is why we train our eyes for what to look for. Because at the professional level, when I use this clip, we get to watch it once, and that's it, and we make a decision. And those trained eyes, people who spend enough time watching clips and know what to look for with body posture and body language, immediately read this as a player who's trying to get out of the way by the fact that that left leg was pulled back. If this player is trying to come in and make good contact, she runs through the player. And this player is going to go this direction, not continuing that direction. If this challenge had been reckless in nature, both players would have ended up going in this direction towards the bottom of the screen, not with this player rebounding backwards with her leg and this player stumbling forward. So we do clip analysis, we do clip study so that we can look at these things in real time and make decisions. We had another question here. Should we be considering SPA? This is not a discussion of SPA. So if we're talking about challenges, then we're going to be thinking about misconduct for the nature of challenges, not for SPA. But if we wanted to look at that, we could say 1, 2 attackers versus 1, 2, 3, 4 defenders. Numerical advantage is not there. Space and options probably not there. So the answer is probably no to this one on SPA as well. So we had a question here from where the referee is viewing this. The referee can only see the red player getting bumped. Yeah, there's some consideration for with this play, maybe having a slightly better angle so that you can look between the players. But again, you can judge a lot by the body language of the player making the challenge. And from this one, the player is trying to get out of the way. So definitely a careless foul from the player in yellow, not a reckless challenge. We had a comment here. Her chest is going forward with the intention to stop the player. I've never seen a player use their chest to try to stop another player. That's not normal football play, and I've personally never seen that in 25 years of refereeing. So I don't think we have to consider this player using her chest to block an opponent. That's not a normal thing. If she was going in there to deliberately block through the opponent, she'd just trip her with her leg. So I think you're misreading the body language of a player trying to back out of a challenge after she realizes she's mistimed it. That's the more likely scenario. Any other questions on the analysis of this clip? This is definitely a difficult decision. I want to emphasize, watching this in full time, this is not an easy decision to make. It's why it's a discussion clip. It's why it's a learning clip, because it's very easy to see this, to see the reaction, and to think that looks really bad and that needs to be a yellow card. And in fact, I think the referee does issue yellow in this game. The thing we don't know about this is, of course, how many fouls has this player committed on the day today. This could be her 4th foul. So we don't know why the referee is giving yellow here. But for the nature of a discussion about whether or not the challenge by itself warrants a yellow card, even still, it's a difficult decision because this red player sells it so well and because this referee is not in an ideal position to be able to see it. The way this play develops, as you can see, this player is cleaning the ball and is going to clearly run in this direction, and the referee is already running in that direction. We don't want to run in our diagonal when play is going to the right side of the field, because then we create this angle of view. So as you can see, she's running there. An ideal scenario would be to start to pinch in this direction, knowing that that player is going to take on a different player, and we want to create an angle of view there. So running away from this challenge instead of towards it is one of the reasons why the referee maybe doesn't see this as well as she could have. But again, simple answer here is this is a careless foul. Couple more questions here. What part does the AR play on this? Very little, because the referee has made a decision. We talked about on the regional webinar last week when and how for ARs to get involved. This is not one the AR is going to get involved in because the referee has already made a decision. And ARs don't get involved when the referee has already made a decision. So question here, she mistimes the tackle and she gets away with it. No, she doesn't get away with it. It would be a careless foul and the team would get a free kick. So no, she's not getting away with it. And we don't give yellow cards every time a player commits a foul. We had another question here. Do you tend to take into consideration a tactical foul to stop the player, which makes it a yellow? Again, we talked about that already. We would not consider this a stopping a promising attack because of the number of defenders that are back, but we're not going to talk about SPA today. Just because a couple of people have said this, this is not a yellow card for a tactical foul. The considerations you have to look at for tactical fouls are the number of defenders, how much space, time, and options do a player have, and how far from goal are they. They are 50 yards from goal here. This touch, it's hard to know this player, if she doesn't get fouled here, good chance this defender still gets in and makes the ball. So no space, no time, no options, 4 defenders against 2 attackers, none of the considerations present for stopping a promising attack. So we would not consider this a tactical foul. Any other questions? Okay, then I'll move us on to our next clip. Again, I want to emphasize that was a difficult clip. That's not an easy one to make a decision, but it's helpful for us to look at because we can start to train our eyes for things to look for. All right, we'll watch just the replays. We don't need to actually go back to the very beginning so we can watch it in full time, and then I'll skip to the replays. And here are the replays. And one more replay. Again, one more time in real time, and then I'll pause it at our moment of truth. First replay is a little hard to pick up. All right. And here comes the poll. A few more seconds to get your votes in. All right. And here are the results. We had 5 people say this is no foul, play on. We had 16 people say this is a careless foul, no misconduct needed. 113 people say yellow card for reckless challenge, and another 25 people say that this is a red card for serious foul play. So this is clearly a foul. We can dispel with that notion. Clearly a foul here. And now we need to talk through the various levels that we have between careless and reckless and endangering the safety of your opponent with an excessive force challenge. So again, we're going to think about the considerations that we started with. What is our mode of contact and what is our point of contact? I'm going to come back to this last replay because it gives us the best opportunity to look at it. Mode of contact, here is the studs, the bottom of the shoe. Player has made a challenge for the ball and mistimes it and instead plants the studs onto the top of the foot. So as we discussed at the very beginning of our time together, anytime the studs are used when making a challenge, we're probably going to think about escalating our misconduct a little bit because the studs can do so much damage to an opponent. Now, it's not the only thing. We don't want to say, you know, oh, if they use their studs, it's a red card, because that's not the reality that we want to be thinking about. But we need to think about the fact that studs are significantly more dangerous than making contact with the side of the foot or the top of the foot, like we had with the first clip. So this is definitely a more dangerous tackle just from the start because the studs are being used to make it. The next thing we're going to look at is the point of contact. Now, fortunate for this player in white here, the point of contact is the top of the foot. So as we talked about with the considerations earlier, when a player receives contact on the top of their foot, it's significantly less damaging than on other parts of the body, like, for example, the Achilles or the ankle or the knee, areas where there are a higher likelihood of getting injured. The top of the foot is a hard surface. It's one that, yeah, it's not going to feel great, but you're not going to get hurt in any kind of significant way from a tackle that happens to the top of your foot. The next thing we look at is the shape of the body. As you can see here, the leg is bent when contact is made. That means as this player follows through the challenge, a lot of the force of that tackle is absorbed by the bending of the knee, which means the force is not transmitted on to the player in white here because she has bent her knee. Now, if you go back just a second, you can see that when the player starts the challenge, the leg is straight. So this is a little bit of a warning sign for us, but the fact that as she follows through, the leg bends means a lot of that force gets taken away. So shape of the body is a big tell for us and what we want to deal with here. And the last is the ability to play the ball. And as you can see, when she makes the challenge, the ball is in playing distance. It's just a missed time challenge. So those considerations lead us to wanting to show a yellow card for this challenge, for a reckless challenge. The biggest consideration being the point of contact. If this kind of challenge happens on the Achilles or higher up the leg on the ankle, then maybe we think about escalating to a red card. But because it happens to the top of the foot, which is an area of the body that is less dangerous, we can go ahead and just settle on a yellow card here. The reason this is a reckless challenge and not a careless challenge is because the mode of contact is the studs. If the studs come down on a foot like this, more than likely, in particular making a sliding challenge, we're going to have a yellow card for that offense. So are there any questions on this? So I think we had a slightly sarcastic comment from Peter. Wait, are we a ref or a physiotherapist? Reckless, studs up, foot planted. Are we just paying attention to the fender and not the attacker? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but this is just a reckless challenge because the player has bent her leg while making the challenge. Reasonably, if we're going to consider this player guilty of an offense, we are going to be more focused on what her body is doing and less on what her body is doing. Now, if this leg is planted and the contact goes to the ankle, then yes, her ankle might get broken, which is why point of contact is really important, and we consider that for a red card. So as I said a moment ago, if this foot goes through the ankle of a planted foot, then yes, the leg could bend and break, and that would make it a red card. But because the contact happens to the foot, the top of the foot in particular, nothing's going to bend, nothing's going to break. The safety of the opponent cannot be endangered here, which is the language and the laws of the game for a red card, which is why this is just a caution. So sarcasm duly noted, but to some degree, the best referees are the ones that look at the body mechanics of the players and understands how that might impact the force of the challenge being made. So as 71% of the group said, you are correct. This is a yellow card. Question here, a very good one. Does it generally take multiple considerations to escalate to red unless the one is particularly excessive? Again, as guidelines and not a firm rule. That's correct. Normally we want to see all of the considerations being met for a red card. The point of contact has to be somewhere in the body where the safety can be endangered. Because at the end of the day, the law says a player can be shown a red card for a challenge that endangers the safety of the opponent. And we really have to factor that in pretty significantly, endangering the safety of the opponent. And if the contact happens to a point of the body where their safety can't be endangered, then we can't have a red card present. So that's why this challenge to the top of the foot like this is not endangering the safety, because while it may not feel good, this is not going to feel good. Her safety is not endangered. And because of that, we would not escalate it to a red card. So the point of contact is important. The mode of contact, you can't endanger the safety of somebody if your thigh bumps their thigh. So your thigh making contact isn't going to endanger their safety. The shape of the body is going to influence how much force is used. Force is one of the big ones we're looking at for red cards, because you have to use a lot of force to endanger the safety of the opponent in most circumstances. And so if a challenge is not made with a lot of force, then we're not going to have a red card for that. So yeah, Stephen, a really good question. We want to see most of the boxes, if not all of them, checked off if we're going to give a red card for endangering the safety of the opponent. A question here, how much further up the foot would you consider this to be on the ankle? I would say it would be on the ankle when it left the foot, because the foot is not the ankle. So this is not contact being made to the ankle. The ankle is above the cleat, or above the shoe, excuse me. And so we can use that to some degree for our barometer, is if the contact is made to the shoe and not to the sock and the ankle, then that's probably something that's on the foot and not on the ankle. But as you can see here, this contact is to the top of the foot, so it's not even the side of the foot. It's not anywhere on the sock. This is just a player's foot on the shoe. So a question here, this question may not be exactly relevant. Do we caution a deliberate stomping onto the top of the foot? The answer to that is actually yes. And I'll go back really quickly, Sonny, for that, and I'll show you a different clip that would demonstrate, I think, the answer to your question. Deliberate or not, Sonny, a lot of your questions, you talk about the word deliberate. Remember, we don't want to consider intent. We just want to look at what actually happened. And so this is a good example of a player who reaches for a ball, misses, but ends up, you can say stomping, stepping, whatever you want to call it, bringing her studs down on the top of a foot. Let me wait for the replay here. So as you can see here, this player reaches for the ball, misses, and steps on the top of the foot. This is a better replay for you. So I think, Sonny, this is a good clip for the question you've asked. A player reaches for the ball, misses, and comes down on the top of the foot. The answer is yes, we want a yellow card for that, because the two primary considerations we're looking at are studs being the mode of contact and the top of the foot being the point of contact. And generally speaking, anytime a player uses their studs to make contact with an opponent like this, we're going to consider that reckless in nature, because we really don't want players initiating contact with opponents with their studs. So, Sonny, I hope that answers your question. But I would really, I appreciate how many questions you asked during these webinars. I would really encourage you to stop thinking about the word deliberate when we're talking about reckless challenges, because whether they did it on purpose or not is not a factor. And one would argue if they deliberately stomp on somebody, we might be thinking about a red card. Any other questions on this clip? Some good questions there. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's look at another one. So I want to answer the first question first. Please remember, we are not talking about stopping a promising attack. If you call this a foul, the answer is yes, this would have to be a yellow card for stopping a promising attack, because this is the definition of a stopping a promising attack. Numerical advantage is 3-on-2, time, space, options, no problem. So if you choose to call this a foul, the answer is yes, we'd have to have a yellow card for stopping a promising attack. What I would like to do for the purposes of tonight is set that entirely aside, because we're talking about challenges. We're talking about misconduct for challenges and not for stopping a promising attack. So let's all acknowledge that if we call this a foul, yes, it would have to be a caution for stopping a promising attack. Put that to the side, and now let's judge it just for the challenge itself. And what would our answer be for this challenge? So pretend like SPA doesn't exist and look at this just for the challenge itself. One more time. And one last time. All right. And again, reminding you, do not think about SPA for this. Just think about the nature of the challenge. What would your answer be? few more seconds to get your answers in. All right. Here's our results. We have 60% say this is a careless foul. We had 9% say no foul. We had 27% say a yellow card, and we had an interesting 3% say that this was a red card. So I'd like to start by saying this is not a red card. There is no studs to anything. There's no force. There's no endangering the safety of an opponent here. So this is not a red card offense. Interestingly, the discussion that we have at different levels of this game are whether or not this is actually a foul or not, which can be an interesting discussion. We have the most people here between a careless foul and a reckless challenge. I will say, I'll start with the answer. This is just a careless foul. We don't need to have misconduct here. Again, setting aside the stopping a promising attack. We don't need to have misconduct here because at the end of the day, she actually doesn't make any contact with the opponent. It's an interesting thing, but when she makes this challenge, she puts her leg in, clearly reaches for the ball, doesn't get it, but the opponent jumps over her. So the two players don't actually end up making any contact with each other. And so we can't consider a challenge reckless when all a player did was stick her leg out and the opponent jumped over it. No contact is made. The leg got stuck out to try to trap the ball or stop the ball, and the attacker jumps over it. So this can't be reckless because there was no contact made. What we can say here is that this is clearly a foul because the laws of the game say trip or attempt to trip, kick or attempt to kick. And so a player creating a barrier with their body without playing the ball that would otherwise bring the attacker down, she has to go well out of her way to avoid the contact and can't stay on as a result, means we want to call a foul here. So our answer would be careless foul, no misconduct needed, setting aside the obvious stopping a promising attack. In this game, we would expect the referee to give yellow here for stopping a promising attack. But as far as it being a reckless challenge, it would not be a reckless challenge. It would just be a careless foul. Any questions on that analysis? Great. So we have probably one more time, for one more clip, which is one of my favorite clips. I wasn't sure we'd have time to get to it, but here we go. One more time. All right. Here comes the poll. Let's see what you got here. A few more seconds to get your votes in. All right. And we are appropriately all over the map on this one. So we had 13% say no foul, play on. We had 21% say careless foul, 48% say yellow card, reckless challenge, and 18% say red card, serious foul play. So let's just go ahead and talk through the considerations and hopefully allow that to land us on what our answer should be here. And I'm going to use this replay here because this tells us everything we need to know. So we have to ask ourselves first, what is the mode of contact? The mode of contact here with the opponent is the studs. So as we learned from the last couple of clips that we look at, when a player makes contact with the studs, that automatically makes us think a higher level on the threshold versus no misconduct or misconduct. So that's the first start, is we have clear example of an opponent using her studs to make contact with an opponent. The next consideration we have is the point of contact. It's hard to tell exactly, but it looks like a bit on the ankle, a bit on the shoe. Hard to know exactly where, but definitely on the foot somewhere and maybe a little bit higher than the foot. The next thing we want to look at is the shape of the body. And that's, for me, is the most interesting part of this clip, is because when she makes the lunging tackle here, her leg is straight. And then as she makes contact with the opponent, the leg bends. So that is really our moment of truth, and you can see the leg is starting to bend. And an interesting consideration that we discussed at a little bit higher level here is how quickly she pulls her foot back. Look how she pulls her foot off the leg. She actually doesn't follow through with the challenge. She just puts her foot on it, realizes it, and pulls it back almost immediately. Remember, this is in really slow motion too. So she really quickly recognizes the contact and yanks the foot back. Interestingly, though, there's a second contact here, which is the slide follows through, and now the foot on the ground makes contact with the leg as well. So it's a bit of a twofer there. And then the last is the ability to play the ball, which, yes, she actually touches the ball away right there. So this player has actually played the ball first. But as we talked about with our first clip that we started with, simply touching the ball before making contact with the opponent is not a license to do whatever you want. So the notion that you hear from coaches all the time, well, they got the ball first, is actually irrelevant. There's a more detailed consideration in the IFAB considerations for match analysis that says if you make unfair contact with an opponent after playing the ball, you should be found guilty of an offense. So this, we have to say, is a player playing the ball, but then making what we should consider to be unfair contact with the opponent after playing that ball. So for those of you who had no foul, we have to look at this contact and say, is this fair? And the answer is no. Putting your studs into the opponent's leg is not fair, regardless of if you've won the ball or not. So that moves us past no foul, play on. We definitely have a foul here. The next considerations we have to look at, like I've said the entire evening, is our point of contact and our mode of contact. Here we have studs into an ankle, which means we should have at least a yellow card here. So really the difference is this a yellow card or is this a red card? The answer here is because the amount of force was not very high, because she pulls her foot out of it when she realized contact is made, this challenge would not endanger the safety of the opponent. And so we would have just a yellow card for a reckless challenge. So the answer to this one from FIFA officially is that this is a yellow card challenge for studs to the ankle/foot, but in what they consider to be a glancing contact, meaning she makes contact, but then she immediately pulls the foot away. So the things for us to really learn from tonight, I think we can summarize with just one clip. For the person who asked, do we need to be a person who's paying attention to body movements of defenders? The answer is yes. We have a straight leg lunging for the ball. We have studs into the ankle of the opponent, but she pulls the foot back as the contact is made, which means the endangering the safety isn't present. So for whoever asked earlier, do we need every single box to be checked for red card? The answer is yes. This is not a red card challenge because there's not a lot of force in it. Yes, she makes contact with the studs, but she doesn't make it in a manner that's going to bend this player's leg or cause any kind of damage or endanger the safety of. So the answer here is yellow card. A thing we often talk about, what would make the difference between this being a yellow card and a red card. If she had flown through this tackle, leaving the leg straight the entire time, then that would have been a red card. And again, we have to look at the body of the person making the attack. If she had used enough speed to make the force something that would endanger the safety of the opponent, she would have slid on past the player, and this leg would have gone directly through the opponent and swung her leg way out there. Because she bends the leg and pulls it back, that mitigates all the force. If she flies through this entire tackle with that leg straight out, meaning at the end of this tackle, her leg's over here, so would this player's leg. And we would consider that to be excessive force endangering the safety of the opponent. So looking at the shape of the body is crucial for understanding how much force has been used in that challenge. Question here, what if the red player has landed on the ankle of the yellow player when she lands? A pair of yellows? No, because if this player is simply falling on the ground as a result of contact being made and she's not in control of her body, we can't punish her for that. Now, if she jumps up in the air and moves her leg out of the way and then deliberately comes down on top of the opponent on purpose, meaning you can see her leg move out to the side to stomp on the player on the ground, then maybe we have something different. But this is a player who has received contact, has now lost control of her body because of the contact. We don't punish her for having received a challenge that made her lose control of the body. Any other questions on this analysis? All right, so I want to summarize again. As we're seeing challenges out on the field, really be paying attention to the shape of the body when they're making that challenge. Is the leg straight? Are they completely off the ground? Or have they bent their leg when they're making the challenge? And then really focus in on your point of contact and your mode of contact. Those two things are really going to help you to figure out the severity of that challenge. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time this evening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll hope to see you next time. Good night, everybody.